Today we are going to be talking about importing data in Sage Intacct. So what we are going to go over today are just some basics of importing. I'm going to give you some pro tips on how we use some tips and tricks that we use whenever we're importing data into Sage Intacct. We're going to tell you where you can find what you can import. We're going to give you some details specifically on importing budgets, and then we're going to get into the software and show you some live examples after I just go through a couple of slides with you. All right, so this is just a slide of some basics and pro tips. I believe that we're going to try to send out a copy of this presentation. That way you have that. And I just wanted y'all to be able to have a couple of bullet points here. So if you are wondering if a field is available for import, maybe you're importing some data in off of a template that you got from us, and you're like, oh, I really wish I could add like a vendor dimension to this. If you want to know, then what you can do is you can actually go download fresh templates by yourself with any new header information. Even if you're using an import template from us, all you have to do is copy and paste that column that you want and put it into your current header. So you can always find what is available to be imported into Intacct. Another pro tip is to highlight required columns. So you can use find and replace or conditional formatting to highlight required columns on any templates that you're downloading to your computer and using those regularly. That way you know what you need to make sure is on that import and not have any errors for just accidentally skipping a field. Another thing that we want to remind you about is the do not import column. And you're going to see examples of this all throughout. I just wanted to give you this list again. But this column is super important because what you can do is you can add a hashtag into this column for any row. And what it will do is it will make the system skip that row as it's going through the import. So for example, if you're getting data from another software, or maybe you have Excel file and there's some totals thrown in there, and you just want to make your journal entry, but you want to check your work with those totals. You don't have to go through there and delete some rows and all that stuff. You can use a hashtag. If you're really good at Excel, you can even write some if then don't formulas over in that column and have those automatically apply for all of your data. So there's some pretty cool things you can do with that. The other thing we want to remind you of is to review your number and date formatting. So you don't want any commas and numbers. You want to make sure that you're not in currency. We are importing as CSV, so commas can mess some things up. There's also on the import screen, you're selecting what your date format is. So if your date format does not match the format that's on that screen, then you're going to get an error. Another thing that we want to remind you of is that whenever you do get an error file, use that download file that you get in the email to correct your data for quick fixes, or sometimes it imports partial data. So you don't have to go through and figure out what got imported, what didn't get imported. Everything that did not get imported is going to be in that error file. And then as you're reading that error message, read it from the bottom up, and we're going to go through that in just a few minutes. That way you can fix it on that file and then just import it right back in. Another thing that we just wanted to remind you of is that when you are importing GL data, it is either a debit or a credit. You cannot have both in a single row, and you need to remove zeros in the opposite row if present. So if I have $100 in the debit column, I cannot have a 0 in the credit column, or I cannot have a 50 in the credit column. I just need to put a positive 50 on the debit, if that makes sense. You can do pluses and minuses in the debit column, so negatives and positives. A negative would reflect a credit. So if you just want to use a debit column, you can throw positive and negative numbers in there and just deal with one column. What can you import? So you can find anything that you can import by going to the company menu, the setup tab, and to import data. It's going to bring you to this company setup checklist. You will find every single thing that you can import into Intacct on this checklist. You'll also find the templates that I was telling you about, where you can go download those fresh templates, see what headers are available. I wanted to make a note here that anything with an asterisk on the company setup checklist, that means it allows updating of existing records. So for example, budgets, vendors, 1099 transactions, vendors for ACH, customers, inventory items. Those are just a couple of the things that have asterisks by them. So if I want to just import or update a vendor's name, or I have a list of vendors' name I need to update, then I can kind of write over the already existing vendor, but I can also use those for new imports as well. All right, and next is where are we going to import? There's a couple of options. So from that company setup tab that we just saw in the previous slide, you can use that import link and go straight from there, and it will bring you to this screen right here. This is where I was talking about the date format. You can also do it from some list views in Intacct. A couple examples of those and ones that we use a lot are AP bills, vendors, invoices, journal entries. When importing from a list view, you do have an option to download a fresh template from that import screen as well. So you can see right here that I have that download template link there. We also recommend that you process all of your imports offline. Why is that? Because first, you can continue to work in Intacct while that import is going in. If it's a larger import, then it's going to take some time, and you need to be able to still continue to do your job at Intacct. Also, you will receive an email from Intacct that has not only the errors, but it also has that error file that I referred to earlier that you can use to correct any errors that you get in your import. All right, I told you we would go over budget specifically. So at Micro Accounting, we recommend that you keep adding to your current budget. So your current budget is tied to all of your reports and all of that kind of stuff. Because of that, it makes it really easy to update budgets that already exist, but also use already existing budgets to create your new budgets for the future. So as I mentioned earlier, budgets are one of the things that you can use and import to update a budget. So it will write over that budget for that budgeting period if you import over it. So for example, if I have a budget for May of this year for $250 for an electric utility, if I import $500 for that electric utility for May of 2025, the budget will show $500 and not $250. It will not add or subtract, so it will not be $750. And it will only write over the accounts and periods that you note on the import. So I might have 1,000 lines of budget, but if I only import in that one $500 line, then it's only going to update that one. It is not going to clear any of the data on the other lines of that budget. So our pro tip to you is to use your previous budget to import your new year updated budget information into your current budget simply by changing the headers. And I'm going to show you an example of this once we get into this live demo. So some steps that you need to take in order to do that, I wanted to make sure they were on a slide for you so that you had that for your records. If you go to budgets and the budget repository, there is an export link next to the budget that you want to update. You're going to export it, and you're going to select your start and end periods. You're going to choose whether or not you want to include your statistical accounts. You're going to choose the dimensions that you want. Do you want locations, departments, all of those things? You're going to remove the notes column. If you want to, you can keep it, but it's just extra columns you kind of have to sort through. And you are going to make sure that you select the CSV importable format. Choose to export it as Excel or CSV, and then you can go and update those headers, make any changes to that budget, and then import it right back in. So really quick before we get into our actual demonstration, we hop into the software. everybody loves whenever we get a successful import. You get an email and it's like, yay, you had no errors. But what happens whenever you get the email that says you have a lot of errors? So errors can happen on the full import or a partial import. If it's a partial error, use the error file to import what data was not imported. You're going to use the body of that email to find your errors, and we are going to read this error message from the bottom up. We're actually going to go through some errors that I received on an import file live. So what we want to do here, I just wanted to make sure that you see, we're going to read from the bottom up. So it says, hey, this location isn't valid. Select a valid location, and we're reading up. All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and hop right into our demonstration here. So I want to show y'all one of the error files that I received. So I got an email saying, hey, I successfully got one of my journal entries in and I had errors on 4. And I got this error file and I downloaded it over here so we didn't have to wait on that to download and stuff. So what am I going to do now? The first thing I want to note is that I am importing 4 separate journal entries by starting over at line 1. So they're all in the same file. You can do this for AP bills, journal entries, invoices. So anything that you're importing in, if you want to start new, then this is going to be, a 41 line journal entry, and then I start a new one there. So start over with the number 1 and get yourself a fresh journal entry and just on one import. So save some time there. So if I'm looking at my error file here, I see that my location 140 is not valid. I need to select a active location. So the first thing I like to do whenever I'm going through these as we work through Intacct is I like to put some filters up here. So I could filter this down and just look for the one that says 140. Lucky for me, it's right there at the top. So on line 2, I just need to update that to a valid location. I've checked the valid location is 110. So I'm going to go down to my next error and it says, hey, this account is not valid. Select a valid account. So again, I'm going to use my filters here and I can see that 2100. So I'm going to unselect all. I'll go there. Hopefully it's only one line. Yes, I got it. So then I go and I just update this. And then I can clear my filter. And now I have another error. So I'm missing a location dimension for this account. So I'm going to go try to find where that account is, or maybe I just try to find where I don't have a location. So I want to try to find the blanks. Uh-oh, I missed a location on all of these lines. So I am going to go ahead. I know that this should have been location 110. So I'm going to put that in and just bring it on down there. And now, so I've gotten that error taken care of. And now I need to go here. So these look a little crazy, right? There's nothing on there. Well, it's because remember right here, I had it brought up that account, but I had lots and lots of lines. So if you see something like that, just keep working through it and you might end up getting it to go in, even if you don't know what that is. So right here, we said we cannot have a direct transaction to a controlled account 20100. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to find that account. And here it is. So what that means is that in our system, we have it configured to where we cannot post directly to that account number. So if I'm entering a bill to that account or a journal entry, it will not allow me to post. It'll give you an error. Well, if you're trying to import to it, it still gives you an error as well. So I need to change this account number to that account number. All right, and I think I have, I have one more error right here. So we got to go to this error. Again, I'm reading from the bottom up, and it says that my transaction date is within a period that's been closed. This is something that we find often as we're working. So I am going to select the date that is 2017. I must have just mistyped that as I was putting this in. So I'm going to change this to 12/31/24. because my demo environment is living in the past. All right. So I'm at this bottom of this email now. I am going to save this error file. I'm going to go ahead and X out of that and go into Intacct. So I am in Intacct now, and I'm going to show you how to import that error. And I'm going to get this in Intacct by going to the company screen, setup tab, import data. And this is just a normal GL transaction or journal entry import. So I'm going to hit the import button there. I am going to choose my file. So here I go. That's my error file that I just did, my date format. Again, I want to process this offline, and I'm just going to go ahead and import this in. And that is easy. All right, so now we talked about being able to update some fields, and I want to show you what a vendor update looks like. So what I wanted to really point out here are two things. First of all, I am about to update a vendor. So let's go check out who this vendor is. So I'm going to go to my accounts payable and vendors. And if I look at my update file, so I'm looking at 20,000. It ends in 8. Woo. Find all my screens. Okay, here we are. So if I look at this vendor, I can see that their vendor type ID is indirect purchases. Maybe I found out that this is actually direct materials, but everything else on this vendor is correct. And maybe it's a lot of vendors that this happened to. Maybe I misimported in some items. So what I'm going to do is whenever I go to import, I can download this template. And this template, if it will open up quickly, has a lot of columns, like a ton of them. I only need to update one thing on this import template, and that is that one vendor type ID column. So I can delete everything I do not need, and I could just go update that one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention here is this notes row. So this is where you will find all of the information of what is required. Is it required? So like this is not required. You know, it will give you your character length. So if I try to put 41 characters in here, it's going to give me an error. So if you have questions about what something means, you can check out this this notes row right here. Again, here's my do not import row that I wanted to point out right there. So I have this vendor update that I want to do. I'm going to update to direct materials. Oop. We don't want to save it because I know that I already have it saved. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and import directly from the vendor list view right there. Since it's just one vendor, I'm going to go ahead and process it online. Shouldn't take too long. Successfully imported one vendor, and it updated the record there. And if I refresh my view, we will see, hopefully, that vendor ending in 8 is now direct materials from my import. Nothing else changed on this screen. All right, the next thing I want to do is to show you how to update a previous budget import or use. Yep.
Before we move on to that, we had a quick question that came in that I wanted to pose to you so you can answer that. The question was, when you're like doing that update, you said you can delete those columns out, but if you leave those columns in there in your import template, but just don't put any data in there, can you explain what happens? I think that if I misunderstood your question, please type that in the chat, but I think I understood your question. So if that on that template, instead of deleting all those other columns, if you just leave those columns in there but don't put any data in them, what will happen is it will actually write over that data and blank out the field. So let's say she left the city, state, zip code field in that import template when she just updated that vendor type, but she didn't put a city state zip in there, then it would actually write over and blank out or erase out the city state zip that was already in there. So be very careful with that if you're updating information, because you either need to have the data populated in the template if you leave those columns in there, or delete the columns out, which is what we typically recommend. So I think that hopefully, did that answer your question? Yes. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. All right. So now we are going to go on to our budgeting. So what I just wanted to show you here is that I wanted to show you that I don't have a budget for 2025 yet. So I am going to run my budget report for 2025, and here is all of the data. Nothing is there. So what I can do, and what we recommend doing, if you have very similar budgets or you just kind of want a starting place, is to download your previous year's budget. So how am I going to do that? I am going to go to the budgets and the budgets repository. I have a lot of budgets in here. We don't recommend this typically, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to export my budget. I'm going to select my period. So I need to select a period that has an actual budget in it from January to December. And I could just do a range of accounts, or I can do all of my accounts. Again, I can do statistical accounts. I can select one location, multiple locations, it does not matter, and then show my dimension values. And here's what is important: is use the CSV importable format and include notes and columns. I like to take this off. It just adds a little bit of extra fluff to that export that it gives you. So we can export this out. And whenever you do that, it'll give you the download file, but I already did that, so we didn't have to wait on my computer. And this is what it looks like whenever it comes out. So you can see that this is month ended January 2024. So all I'm going to do is I am going to use the find and replace. So anytime I see 2024, I want to replace it with 2025. And I like to just do a find all and make sure that they're all in that row 1 there, that everything looks good. So I'm going to replace all. And now all of my headers say 2025. If I needed to make any updates to this budget, so maybe instead of $12,000 or maybe $120,000, I can't see because I have really bad eyesight. Maybe that was supposed to be 12,000 instead of 120. You can make any updates like that. I also wanted to note here that you have your account numbers and all of these dimensions. If your GL account doesn't require a dimension, you might have some that don't have it. So just make sure you're aware of what is required for a GL account before you do, because you will get those import errors. So now that I have this updated, I'm going to go ahead and hit save on that, and I'm going to exit out of there. And I am going to go to budgets and my budget repository, and I'm going to go ahead and import from here. So I'm going to choose my file and get my New Year budget update. And the budget will always run offline. You don't have an option to run that online. So just to make sure you're aware of that. So I'm going to import that in, and I'll keep an eye on my email, and we'll come back and take a look at that. I also wanted to point out that we can do updates just like we did with vendors. Like I mentioned, it will write over everything that is there. So if you don't put all of the GL accounts that are on that budget, I ran this report just for one GL account and one department, but you can do multiple. If you don't want to write over it, then don't put it on here. So here I am. I wanted to point out what I did make a change to. So this is what it looks like if you export it as an Excel. This is what it looks like if you export it as a CSV. I prefer, it depends on what you want. You do need to import it as a CSV though, so I kind of like to do both. I updated this from 90,000 to 190,000. So we got that, and I am going to save that. And once we import it, let's go take a look at what that looks like first before I import that. So I'm going to run the budget report for just one GL code. So 401-100, oops, too many. And my budgeting period, let's do, I did it for all of 2024. All right, so that is in there. That's what it looks like. We are going to see some changes on there once I get this imported. So we're going to go ahead and import this in again. And you can also do that from that company update as well. And we're going to import. All right, so we're going to let that run. And do y'all have any questions so far?
There actually are a couple of questions that came in on the budget imports. The first one is it says they've seen some errors that they had a hard time interpreting and understanding, but something about a duplicate in their file. I can field that one because I think I understand what you're asking. So if you have the same account and dimensions in your import file multiple times, it will error out because, again, as Caitlin said, it's going to write over whatever's there. So if it imported in the first time it saw it and then saw it a second time and it imported over that, and you would have a hard time finding that. So instead of it doing that, it actually will just error out and say there was a duplicate. So you have to have each account and dimension combination just in your file one time. So I think that was that question. And then the other question was, can you import in on the budget multiple companies at the same time? Can you import in statistical GL accounts and have those on the same import? So I think that's kind of the gist of that question.
Yeah, you absolutely can. So on our import that we did, the first example of that, we had multiple companies a bit on that one. So let me try to pull up that screen so that y'all can take a look at that. So yes, you can do multiple companies. You also can include, and let me make sure I show y'all the screen again. So whenever you're on this budget report that you're going to use to export as the CSV importable format, up here under your accounts, you do have the ability to include statistical accounts on that output. So again, this can be used as a great template for making any updates. You know, you don't want to have to be like, okay, I only want to do May for this one account for this one thing. So you can export your account and, you know, keep everything the same, but make that one update that you need, whether it's a statistical account or a GL account. Again, you can select just one account, or you can even select multiple accounts from here. So I hope, does that answer that question?
Yes, looks like they're good.
Okay.
And that was the last question. Thank you.
Awesome. So let me go see if we have a budget for 2025 yet, just to show y'all that that goes in there perfectly without an error. Let's see here. There we go. We have a budget for 2025 for this one account. I forgot to take away, but it will all be in there if I take out that range and just do all accounts. And there's our 2025 budget where we made those, we used the previous one. You can see all of the dimensions and stuff in there.